There we go. Sorry about that. We always tested before, and something always tend to go amiss. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm Nico van der Rooyen, board member at SOC. I'll be the moderator for tonight. I'll introduce our speaker shortly. Some housekeeping rules. Please keep your microphone on mute and please don't share your video as it makes it super slow. Please make sure your first and last name is in your Teams chat. That's for the CPE. The presentation will be recorded and the slides might be released after the session. We just have to get approval from KPMG, so it might be coming, it might not. So please be aware of that. If you guys have any questions, please put it in the chat or raise your hands. I'll help our speakers tonight go through it and answer the questions as good as we can. For everyone that doesn't know already, our risk event is coming up 16 November. Hey, ChatGPT, can I trust you? A really cool lineup, so please have a look at it. More information on the ISACA slides. Definitely not to miss. Already 300 tickets sold. I think last year we had 550-ish people participating. So for everyone that was there, know it was quite a good and successful event. So please go and have a look. It's going to be really nice this year as well. And then to get to the good stuff, our two presenters for tonight, Rob van Gaarden and Jorik Verduin. Rob is a director within IT assurance at KPMG with over 12 years of experience in the field of IT attestation, SOC 1 and SOC 2. Jorik is a manager with him in the same department with over 5 years of experience in SOC 1, 2 and IT attestation. So of course for the session tonight it'll be really good to get some input, but not to take away from the speakers at all. I'm going to stop sharing and you guys can please take over, Rob and Jorik. And good luck and people please enjoy.
All right, thank you very much, Nico. Let me share my screen and please let me know. Maybe Jorik, if you, because you're the only one I can see. It's visible. There. All right. Yep. So thank you very much all for joining tonight in our SOC 2 Secrets Unveiled benchmark seminar. We're going to talk you through the SOC 2 standard for a little bit over the coming hour, and we will share the results of our benchmark analysis that we have performed over the last year with, I think, some very interesting results in there. But before we dive into the content, well, maybe a bit of a reintroduction from our side. Also, thanks, Nico, for your introduction. So a little bit about myself at first. So my name is Rob van der Gaarden. I will actually be a director in a couple of days, but I wanted to share it on the sheet already. Been with KPMG for over 12 years now, and I've been always focusing on IT assurance and IT assurance related advisory engagement. So I have a lot of experience in providing SOC 1, SOC 2, ICE 3000 reports to my clients, mostly in the financial sector or in the to technology service providers or IT service providers. Next to that, I have two great roles in the field. That is that I'm the IT attestation lead for the Netherlands. So everything that has to do with IT assurance and IT attestation, I can talk about that within KPMG. And I'm also the SOC 2 lead in our EMEA region for KPMG. So we not only train our colleagues, national and international, but we also help develop the standard and also develop more materials to help our clients reach certain IT assurance reports. Very happy to have my colleague Jorik with me as well. So Jorik, can I hand it over to you?
Yeah, thank you, Rob. My name is Jorik Verduin, working as a manager within the same department as Rob. Also, when I started almost 6 years ago, I guess, immediately focused on the IT attestation part of the IT assurance. We're also focusing, of course, on real IT audits for financial statements. But I got more interested in the SOC 1, SOC 2 and IT attestation engagements. Started also immediately with SOC 2, right now, having over 5 years of experience with it. I'm also a trainer for the EMEA region, in which we, today also did a training on SOC 2 for the colleagues in the EMEA region. Then going through the agenda for today, as mentioned, first we're going to take you through some of the fundamentals of the SOC 2, just for some people to get a basic understanding if they don't have already, and also if you already have the knowledge, just to maybe do a deep dive on questions. So don't feel or feel free to ask questions, and don't feel bothered or interrupt us. Just do it. That makes it more interactive, which is nice. Then afterwards we will dive into our assurance benchmark we did on SOC 2 clients, which we will take you through some key takeaways, which is from our point of view very nice, and we're building up on that. Afterwards there's also room for questions, but as mentioned, just if you have questions, shoot. Then I'm handing it over back to you, Rob.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's first start with some of the SOC 2 fundamentals, because we didn't know what your experience is or isn't with SOC 2. So just to either brush up on your SOC 2 knowledge or give a very quick, I would say, lecture on what SOC 2 is. And normally we give a full day course about this. So if anything is unclear, do let us know via the chat or ask some questions afterwards, and we can come back to you on that. But maybe to first start off, what actually SOC 2 is and what does it entail? So SOC 2 is an assurance standard from the AICPA. It's from the US, and it's about giving assurance on operational controls. And these operational controls are grouped into different categories. So if you want to get SOC 2 accredited, or you get a SOC 2 assurance engagement, or you're giving one, you can do that on either of the 5 categories that are here shown on screen. And I think the good part of SOC 2 is that it comes with a standardized control framework, or a standardized framework with different criteria that you need to adhere to. So this makes it really nice, because you can actually compare companies that have a SOC 2 assurance standards with each other. Maybe to do a little sidestep, if you do for instance, a SOC 1 report or an ISA 3000 report, the company or the service organization normally drives the scope and the control objectives, or the controls that are in scope. But if you want to do a SOC 2 report, it prescribes the criteria that you need to adhere to. So if you receive a report from either a US listed firm or a European firm, you can always make sure that the things that are covered in the SOC 2 are you can compare them, because they're actually the same. And we will tell you a bit more about how it compares, for instance, also to SOC 1, and how the standard is built up. But first I want to talk a little bit about the different categories. So on the top you see the security standard, and this is, I would say, the most common category to get assurance on. So the security trust service category is around information and systems being protected from unauthorized access, unauthorized disclosure of information, damage to systems that could compromise the availability, the integrity, the confidentiality and privacy of information, or systems to affect the entity's ability to meet these objectives. And what we tend to see is that security is sort of like a basis for a SOC 2 engagement, and companies always start with securities and use one of the 4 additional categories as add-ons. So next to security, you can also give assurance on availability, and that has all to do with informations and systems being available for operation to once again meet the entity's objectives. Confidentiality, it's about protecting information. Processing integrity is about getting accurate, timely, and authorized system processing, give assurance on. And the last one is a bit of an odd one out. It's privacy or privacy. And why is this a bit of an old one out? Because the SOC 2 standard is based on US legislation. It's also based on the US privacy standards. And of course, here in Europe, we have GDPR or AVG here in the Netherlands. So to use the privacy category, you need to do a lot of additional work because you would need to include a mapping from the US requirements up to the GDPR requirements here in Europe. So in practice, we see that a lot of companies don't include the privacy category because it's just a lot of additional work, and B, it's a lot of I would say fuss to go the extra mile to make all the mappings and make it compliant with GDPR. Of course, there is information available to map it to the GDPR, for instance, but again, it's not something we see in practice. So I think most of the time we see the security category together with either the availability or the confidentiality category. But we will deep dive into this also during the benchmark data because we have data on that. And maybe as a comparison, because most of you might know the SOC 1 standard a bit better by heart. So SOC 1, the same as the ICE 3402, or for our Dutch practitioners, richtlijn or standaard 3402. It's good to make a comparison because a lot of the times a client, for instance, or from our perspective, will already have a assurance report. Most of the time that's either an IC 3000 report or IC 3402. But what are the main differences? And we listed them out here. So SOC 1 is really focused on internal control over financial reporting. So it's about service provider performing financial transactions or processing financial transactions or supporting this system. So the assurance report looks at, as mentioned here on the slide, classes of transactions, procedures for processing and reporting, the accounting records. So it's really focused on, I would say, financial information and the processing of that and testing controls around that. If you look at the SOC 2, it's rather different. SOC 2 looks at a lot of different elements actually. So it looks at the operational controls from a service organization. So it's focused on security, confidentiality, availability, processing integrity or privacy, but it's also applicable to a broad variety of systems. So the service organization itself can really drive the scope of what should be included in the SOC 2. And it does this over the different elements that are here shown on the slide. So if you're going to do a SOC 2 assurance engagement, or you want to get assurance on this, you need to describe the services that you are providing to your clients and do that over the elements here on the screen. So you need to tell something about the infrastructure that you're using. So what locations are in scope of the service you are providing? What type of software do you use to actually provide the services to your client? What type of data is used, and what type of procedures do you use to control your environment in that? And also a large element is how do you deal with people? So how do you deal with people from a governance perspective? Also, what is, for instance, the tone at the top? Or what does management need to have in place in relation to, for instance, the security? But also what type of locations are in scope, and how do you actually control your operational systems in relation to the scope that you're giving assurance on. So as a narrative, it's really different to SOC 1, and I think that what makes it quite nice as well, because it just gives you as a user, but also from a service organization perspective, an opportunity to show more of your company and to give assurance on a wide variety of subjects. So if we then take a bit more of a deep dive into the standard, how is it built up? So on the left-hand side here, you see how a typical SOC 2 report, assurance report would look like. So you would start off with the services auditor's report, which is the opinion of a external auditor, such as KPMG, for instance. And then it would be followed by a so-called management statement. And this is actually the same as, for instance, in a SOC 1 report, where you have an auditor's opinion and you have a management statement in there. So in that case, you can make the comparison. But then the differentiation starts because then you come into the management description of the system. And if we are going to perform a SOC 2 assurance report, there are two sets of criteria that we use in such an engagement. So the one is the so-called description criteria that is mentioned here on the slide. And the description criteria include all the criteria that you need to adhere to be included into the management description of the system. So for instance, in the previous slide, I shown and let me just go back to that, that a SOC 2 should tell you something about the infrastructure, software, data, procedures, and people of a company. This is what a service organization is also obliged to subscribe in their system description. So there's quite a large number of description criteria that you need to adhere to as a service organization. Otherwise, you can't call it a SOC 2. Then you get to the to section 4 or to the fourth part, where you actually mention the criteria, the related controls, and the test of controls. So this is the second set of criteria, and those are the so-called trust service criteria and related points of focus. So the trust service criteria, you can compare them with, I would say, control objectives in a regular assurance report. And what you do is you map your control objectives or your controls from your service organization, you map them to the trust service criteria. And to help you out, the AICPA has come up with something called points of focus. So if a service organization does want to obtain the SOC 2 report, they need to adhere to all the trust service criteria based on the categories that they've chosen. And to make sure that they cover them all, you use these so-called points of focus to check whether the controls substantiate all the trust service criteria. And it's based in the end, or the meaning is to provide reasonable assurance that the so-called service commitments and system requirements were achieved based on the criteria. And we will, what those are, we will deep dive into a bit later. So for us as auditors, but also if you're a service organization, it's really key to understand what are your service commitments and what are your system requirements, what risks are there that threaten the achievement of that, because that in the end also determines the controls that you want to implement and test on, in the end, operating effectiveness by your external auditor. And then there's a fifth section in the report that is other information provided by the service organization, and this is just the same again as in the SOC 1 report, which is an optional section where, for instance, management can give management comment, you can add a glossary, or you can add some additional information that in the end has not been audited by the service auditor. And I think that's key to understand here, that the service auditor will not give an opinion on something that has been included in the other information section by the service organization. This is an optional section, so if you don't see it in one of the SOC 2 reports that you're either making or receiving, that's totally fine. Then about the actual trust service criteria and what you need to test. So they are organized in, I would say, 9 different categories. And on the left-hand side, you see, and maybe some of you know them by heart, all the different COSO elements. So CC1 up till CC5 are all the major elements from COSO 2013. And these act as, I would say, the basis for your SOC 2 report. So if you want to do a SOC 2 report, you're going to have to adhere to a lot of COSO elements and COSO controls. If you look at the right-hand side, you would come more, I would say, in the more detailed or security-like controls. So CC6 is about logical and physical access controls. CC7 is about system operations. So this is your antivirus, firewalls, etc. CC8 is change management, which I think speaks for itself. And CC9 is risk mitigation, where, for instance, how you deal with subservice organizations come in. And together, these are called the so-called common controls. And these common controls cover the trust service category of security. But you also see on the bottom right-hand side that there are additional criteria related to availability, confidentiality, processing integrity, or privacy. So if you are pursuing a SOC 2 report and you want to cover security alone, you cover the trust service criteria CC1 up to and including CC9. Once you've covered those, you have a SOC 2 report that covers the category security. If you want to add the additional criteria, there are some more trust service criteria that come into play. And I think the next slide sums it up pretty well, what those actually are. So I mentioned earlier that how is the SOC 2 organized? So you start off at the left-hand side of the screen, where you have the 9 common control sections. And each of the common control sections have different, well, so-called criterion. And you can see the criterion as a control objective that you should meet. And those criterion can be met by the so-called points of focus. So if you want to cover the 5 criterion, for instance, of the control environment, so which is CC 1.0, you need to cover 26 so-called points of focus, and you cover the points of focus with the controls the service organization has implemented or will be implementing. And the relation between points of focus and internal controls is of I would say, an end-to-end relationship. So it can be the case that you have one control covering multiple points of focus, but it can also be the other way around, that sometimes to cover one point of focus, you would need multiple controls in place. And in the end, you need to cover all the 197 points of focus to cover the security trust service category. And this is, I think, also really, well, explanatory why SOC 2 reports, as opposed to an IC 3000 or a SOC 1 report, are usually that much bigger, and there's a lot of more controls in a SOC 2 report as opposed to a SOC 1 or an IC 3000 report, because you're obliged to cover all the points of focus. And this is only for the security category. We also have 4 additional categories, which are on the next slide. And if you add them, you see that in some cases, there are additional points of focus added in the so-called common criteria. So you see that on the right-hand side of this screen. So you add an additional 12 points of focus if you want to include confidentiality and privacy as well. But there are a lot more if you look at the additional trust service categories. So if you want to add, for instance, availability, there are an additional 10 points of focus that you need to cover. And I think on the last line of this table, you see that for privacy, you add even an additional 51 points of focus, which is probably one of the main reasons we don't see privacy that much, because it just adds so much additional controls, which also of course raises the cost of your assurance standard. So a lot of controls to cover, and you need to cover them all if you choose, for instance, to do all the categories, because otherwise you can't call it SOC 2. So that's also up to the auditor to check that all the points of focus are covered by the controls, therefore covering all the criteria. And just as a last slide, as a sort of fundamental, so why should you then still do SOC 2? Because it is a lot of work. But on the other hand, we see that it has benefits for both, I would say, IT service providers or technology service providers, because it builds trust to their clients. It's a very nice integration over technology and enterprise risk management, because it not only covers the security controls, but it also covers the COSO elements. So it's not all hard technical controls, but also is a lot about communication, governance, etc. It's helpful in growing internal control maturity because you need to cover all these controls and all these points of focus. So there's no hiding in there because you want to give assurance in that. And of course, it helps in giving transparency over the provided services from service providers to their clients actually. And for clients, it's I think also quite evident. So you get assurance on important criteria such as security and availability, which I think are becoming increasingly more top of mind at least at our clients. Vendor risk management is also, I think, a very hot topic, especially in financial services currently, because we see that DNB, for instance, is asking, so how do you manage your vendors or your service organizations, and can they comply to all the new types of legislation coming in? And I think SOC 2 can really help in that. And of course, from a client perspective, it gives insight in the maturity and the controls of the service provider, and it provides them with a mandatory baseline to adhere to. So this was a very brief overview of SOC 2 and some of the fundamentals. So normally we would give a full day course on this. So I can expect if there are any questions sort of now. I haven't been able to see the chat yet.
Hi, Rob. A question just came through, so I'll quickly read it. It's from Arthur. How does this relate to the DORA regulation?
Yeah. So I would say that well, DORA is of course European based, and this is US based because it's from the AICPA. I do expect that with a SOC 2 on security, at least, you will cover a lot of the DORA requirements. But we are still awaiting to do the first mapping when the full DORA framework becomes available, to see whether we can cover it with a SOC 2 or we need some additional controls to be tested in a SOC 2. And one of the other options that you have in SOC 2 is, for instance, you can do a SOC 2 plus. So that means choose either one or more of the trust service categories, choose an additional add-on, for instance, NIST. And I think DORA can be one of those additional regulations as well, where you take the SOC 2 as a basis and you add, I would say, the gap of the controls that DORA requires but are not yet covered by the SOC 2. So I see this coming in probably in a couple of years, that clients will transition maybe into this.
Thanks. If there's any more questions, feel free to raise your hand or just add it to chat, but I don't see anything right now.
Right. Then I'll move it on to you, Jorik, and please let me know when I should progress the slides.
Yes, thank you, Rob. Very good question as well on the DORA regulation, of course. As the title also mentioned, we wanted also to give you some secrets unveiled about SOC 2. We see in the market and also with our clients that SOC 2 is it's requested. It's mentioned a lot of questions on security, and can you give me more assurance on how you implemented security controls? Do you have a SOC 2? So all these questions add up to clients, and then they come back to us. So we were thinking, okay, we should try to get more insights in this. Therefore, we did a first benchmark. Please note this is a first benchmark. We are also expanding it and want to get more of the secrets unveiled, because it's also pretty difficult although it's a standard, there's a lot of differences based on the benchmark information. So if we go to the next slide, you see that we looked into 15 different technology service providers as the first benchmark. Basis on that, we just compared relevant elements we thought of. So how many controls are there in the framework? Which trust service categories do they include? Like Rob mentioned, well, privacy, we don't see that much in the EU. So please also note this is from the EU SOC 2 reports. So is he right or not? Well, Rob knows some of the information already, so I guess he is. But we will see. If we go to the next slide, then we can see that. Security, well, 15 of the 15 reports include security. And also privacy, you see that it only comes back once, which is, well, in line with our assumptions as well. It's a lot of work for EU companies to get the privacy in control. There are other standards for that. We adhere to the GDPR. It's not that compliance driven yet from clients, so they don't get that request much. That request must, and security is really important. So you see that that's the main driver for the SOC 2 right now. Also, what Rob showed is, of course, points of focus you need to cover. You need to cover 197 points of focus with only the common criteria, which is security. And if you add availability and confidentiality, it only adds 18 points of focus altogether. So also, again, an assumption, it's efficient to include those. You see that a lot of organizations choose to also include those. Availability is there 11 times. Confidentiality is there 10 times. Process and integrity, yeah, I would say that's you don't see that much often. You see right now organizations struggling with, okay, we're not really providing, or we are providing a SOC 1, but are we really relevant for the financial statement or not? So they're reconsidering and trying to look into the possibilities to just merge their application controls, which are included in ISA 3202, into processing integrity. Not that much yet, as you can see, it's only coming back 3 times. If we do a deep dive on that, we see that on the next slide, that this is per client, where you can see that everybody has security. And also there are 5 organizations that only take security, and with that find it sufficient for their clientele. The other ones you see is that processing integrity again only comes back 3 times, but it's in addition to already availability, confidentiality, and security. So probably this is an organization that has SOC 2 for a longer period of time, and adding those together. What we also suggest, and what you see often, is that when organizations start off with SOC 2, there's a lot of, well, information, but also work coming towards them. So scoping is essential. They start off with just a category. Let's start off with security, and let's start off with the service, a small service we provide, just to try and see how it works. Probably the organizations having security, availability, confidentiality, and processing integrity are already more mature. Then there's a question, so I will address that one. What are the common reasons given by companies why a SOC 2 is not sufficient and that they want to exercise their right to audit? That's a bit off topic. Did I?
Well, I think I can give a first answer. So I haven't seen yet that companies would exercise their right to audit if the service organization has a SOC 2 available. And most of the time, and at least I think that's my opinion, that the service organizations that are providing a SOC 2 provide that on all the trust service criteria, and that is most of the time sufficient for the user organization, so that they don't need their right to audit. So I think most SOC 2, or at least the large IT service providers, provide next to their SOC 2 also still a SOC 1. So then you cover both the internal control for financial reporting perspective and the security and one of the additional categories as an available as a scope. And then I haven't seen it in practice yet that a user organization still wants to exercise their right to audit. It can be the case, but I would expect then that would be on a very specific item that's really, I would say, high risk to their specific business. And maybe to understand the other question, are there any privacy certifications in place? Is this the reason why privacy isn't part of the SOC 2? Well, you can do privacy as part of the SOC 2, but I think, especially in Europe, there are other options available that are even better. Of course, there's an ISO standard, I think either published or currently in development with regards to privacy. And for instance, here in the Netherlands, we see we have the NOREA privacy control framework that we have done, at least from KPMG perspective. We've given assurance on that framework to a number of clients. But I think the most times that I've given assurance on privacy controls is in, I would say, regular SOC 1s or ISA 3000 reports, where a company adds their like top 10, top 15 privacy controls in the scope of the report. So you see either assurance on it via the IC 3000 standard or via the NOREA privacy control framework, or people are opting for the ISO certification. Yes, indeed, and a very helpful chat. The ISO number for that is 27701, indeed, for privacy.
Yeah. So maybe also based on my experience with SOC 2 clients, I have never got back from them that their clients also use their right to audit. What you do tend to see right now is that if clients only provide a SOC 1, so an ISA 3402, that most organizations want to have more insight or in the security controls. Also focusing on the requirements from the financial sector. The DNB good practice is there, and many clients need to get insights in their sub-service organizations and service organizations on whether they have security controls in place or not. So you do tend to see with clients having a SOC 1 that there's more right to audit, or they make use of their right to audit. For SOC 2, I haven't seen it yet. Then if we go into the next slide, then we can see or we get a takeaway on the total controls of the 15 reports and how they are divided. These were some, well, I wouldn't call it shocking results, but interesting results, because there are, with only security, there is of course 197 points of focus you need to cover. Meaning that most of the times you aim towards an 80 to 100 controls if there's a standard service being provided and you have only security in scope. With this overview, you see that there is on average 168 controls with a big spike higher, but also a very interesting spike that's lower than that. Then you would say, oh, well, they probably only have security in scope, which is not for all of the low controls the case. Most of them have security, availability, and confidentiality. So that was interesting to see. But you do see that a lot of the controls are focused on the points of focus for security. Then I will also address the question again. From your experience, which controls are most prone to fail? CQ. Well, I will postpone this question because we also have an overview with control deficiencies.
Yeah.
So we will go into that, not in the details on all the deficiencies, but how many, and then we can also address this question. A lot of these controls are focusing on the security points of focus, which is logical with the 197 points of focus to cover. And then from there you see the others, availability and confidentiality coming back again with a lot of controls. Also, please note that controls are also, you can use one control for other points of focus. So there could be that a control is coming back in availability, confidentiality, and security. If we go into the next slide and we get some insights in the subservice organizations, the clients included, which was also again interesting to see that some say they don't have any critical subservice organizations for their operations. Could mean that the scoping is being set on just a small part of the service they provide, and in that they don't make use of a supplier. And for some, you see a lot of subservice organizations, 13 and 11, which are big numbers. If we go to the next slide, we see on average there are 4.5 on average subservice organizations. And also we looked into what services do the subservice organizations provide. There are a lot of sub and services in that, but most of them are focusing on cloud services, which you tend to see a lot right now with a lot of companies going to the cloud, going to the big cloud providers and then making them into a sub-service organization. Luckily, most of the big cloud providers have also a report for them because, and that we'll see, is that the sub-service organization is relevant in a SOC 2. On what level? On the CSOC level. Next to that, also again, if you're not yet into the cloud, then you also have a data center provider for you, which is a subservice organization. Most of the subservice organizations are focusing on those services provided. Please note when you scope your report that it's really relevant to identify critical subservice providers. And include them in the report by means of a carve-out or an inclusion, of course. However, an inclusion is pretty much work in a SOC 2. So most of the times carve-out is being used. Then what I mentioned is why is it relevant to look into the subservice organization is because SOC 2, and then we see that on this one, has CSOCs included. So when you're applying or this SOC 2 standard, you are required to look into the subservice organization controls, which are relevant for your report. So if you want to achieve your system requirements and commitments made, then you should look into the subservice organization and the dependency on them and how they deal with the different risks they have and if they have controls for that. From there, you see some of the reports do not include complementary subservice organization controls, which in my opinion is a bit strange because these ones that have 0 do have subservice organizations, but then with saying they don't have subservice organization controls, they basically say there's no risk, so it's not critical at that point, in my point of view. Then if we do a deep dive in the complementary user entity controls, of course, and this is relevant for if you provide a SOC 2 to your client and if you receive one as a client, then you need to look, of course, into the report, which is relevant for you. What do I need to do and what kind of controls do I need to have to make sure that the service organization can indeed fulfill their commitments and system requirements. not going to explain the term. I hope most of the people know what a complementary user entity control is, but that's an assumption. So if not, please let me know. Then if we look into the next slide, and there we have the question. In the total of the 15 reports, there were 100 exceptions in all the reports. One with already almost covering all of them, or at least half of them. And in others, you see some exceptions coming back. In most of the time, so 93% of the findings were in operating effectiveness. We looked into more detail on, okay, what is then the exception, and did it impact a service commitment or a criterion? And most of the times it was in operating effectiveness, and it did not impact the system criteria. Then looking into the question, so from your experience, which controls are most prone to fail? CQ, where do you find the most defects? As Rob also showed in the common criteria, that on the left side there was a big focus on the COSO elements, and on the right side there was a big focus on, well, we call it the general IT controls. Based on my experience, the general IT controls, also looking into SOC 2 and the scoping, most of the times the errors occur there, because organizations don't have their scoping yet fully in line with the controls they have in place, and also proving that the controls are in place or auditing them is difficult. And you see a lot of errors or deficiencies on the right side, so on the real general IT control side. Also the COSO elements are sometimes, I wouldn't call it fake, but a little bit more procedural. So are there procedures? Well, yeah, there are. So at that point it already is effective. And if you review them, then again, it's again a point of focus covered. So I tend to see a lot of errors in the general IT control, so the right side of the common criteria. I'm not sure if your experience is different, Rob.
No, I would second that indeed, and I think also based on the benchmark, we see that 93% of the findings are found in operating effectiveness, and I think what is the same as your story. So the COSO elements are most of the time like yearly controls or controls that you cover in design and in implementation, and you don't necessarily have a lot of operating effectiveness controls in those COSO elements, but especially the change management and the access to programs and data controls, that's where I in practice also see the majority of the findings. So technically probably the same as in a lot of SOC 1 reports as well.
Yeah, that's also I also write it down because I like the question, and I think also the deep dive. You mentioned the COSO elements are more annual control, so you can also look and when was the testing done, because if you start off early, most of the yearly controls, you can also anticipate that they still need to be done, and you get that in an early stage already. So I wrote that down. That's a nice addition. As mentioned, we are keeping this benchmark, keep on improving it, and keep adding new details to it. Then if we go to the next slide, then we have some key takeaways from the benchmark right now. As mentioned, you see a big variation of subservice organizations. Some don't have any, some have a lot. Most focus on hosting services and physical security, such as a data center. You could say there's a correlation between the amount of controls and subservice organization. but that's a bold statement because one of the low control client that had a lot of subservice organization, but that was a one-off. So you could say that the more subservice organizations, the more controls the organization has. Then again, the trust service criteria and scope, always security 15 times, confidentiality 10 times, and availability. Those are the most common. The controls in report, 168 on total. There's, basis on that, you cannot say there is a one-off framework per trust service category. The main focus remains to be the points of focus you need to cover, and really look into the commitments and system requirements you as an organization make, or the organization you have to audit makes. So I hate to bring it, but there's no standard off-the-shelf framework. Okay, implement this and you have a SOC 2. There is a lot of guidance, of course, so the points of focus will give you that, but the implementation is really up to the organization or up to you as helping them, making it as efficient and covering everything as possible. The number of controls is based on the scoping of the services and, of course, the trust service categories, which is again looking into the scoping of a SOC 2. Scoping is really essential because scoping of the services makes you look into the commitments made and system requirements from that. That brings us with the questions. I saw that we answered most of them during the session. However, right now we also have some time to answer more questions. So if you have any, just let us know.
Yeah, come off mute if you would like, or please post them in the chat. And should any question pop up over the course of this evening or this week, you can always send us an email. Not sure whether our email addresses were shared, but otherwise you can find this post on LinkedIn, or you can at least find us on LinkedIn and share a message there if you want to know more. Then that's also not a problem.
Sure, let's just give it a minute to see if any questions still remain that hasn't been answered. Okay, while we're waiting questions for all the SOC members, please remember the meeting tomorrow night at 8, the voting in of the new treasurer. So please be there. You should have received an email from Debbie already. If you don't have it, please just let us know. Then if there's no other questions, I think most of the people are saying thank you and good night. We'll call it a day. Everyone have a lovely night and speak to you guys soon again. Thanks for participating.